This is a restricted area, sir, and frankly, your junk pile is an eyesore. We had it removed for the good of the community." The voice was as syrupy as it was condescending, a thick, cloying tone that scraped against my nerve endings like rust on steel. I turned slowly from the raw, splintered wound in the earth where my cabin had stood for 30 years. Before me was a woman who seemed poured into a pastel pink tracksuit, her face a mask of smug satisfaction. She was plus size, with a helmet of sprayed blonde hair that looked like it could deflect small arms fire, and she held a clipboard like a scepter. This had to be Karen, the new HOA president my tenants had mentioned in passing emails. The air, thick with the scent of pine and freshly turned dirt, was now poisoned with her cheap perfume. My cabin, the one I'd built with my father, the one where my daughter took her first steps, the one that held the lingering scent of my late wife's favorite wood polish, was gone. In its place was a scar of mud, tire tracks, and the pathetic remnants of a foundation, a few splintered 2x4s sticking up like broken bones. The demolition crew had been thorough. "My junk pile," I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. I could feel the old training kicking in, the practiced calm that settles over you in the moments before everything goes sideways. My heart rate was a steady, heavy drum, not a frantic flutter. That was my home. Karen gave a theatrical sigh, a puff of air that conveyed immense boredom with my trivial concerns. "It was an unapproved structure according to our records, and you were delinquent on your HOA fees for 6 months. We sent numerous notices. When you failed to respond, the board voted to enforce the bylaws and remove the violation. It's all very standard." She tapped the clipboard with a perfectly manicured nail. The sound was like a cricket chirping in the sudden, ringing silence of the forest. I felt a cold, clean anger crystallize in my gut, not the hot, messy rage that leads to mistakes, but the focused, diamond-hard fury of a man who has seen true chaos and knows how to navigate it. I'd been away for 18 months, a private security contract in a part of the world where disputes were settled with things far louder than clipboards. I'd come back for peace, for the quiet lapping of the lake against the shore, for the familiar comfort of my own handiwork. Instead, I'd come back to this, to her. "What fees?" I asked, keeping my gaze locked on hers. "The fees for being a member of the Lakeside Meadows Homeowners Association," she said, enunciating each syllable as if I were a particularly slow child. "Fees that pay for my time, for community upkeep, for ensuring that property values are maintained by removing dilapidated structures, like yours." She made a dismissive gesture toward the wreckage. That's when the absurdity of it all hit me with the force of a physical blow. The sheer, unmitigated gall. I started to laugh. It wasn't a happy sound. It was rough, rusty, torn from a place of profound disbelief. Karen's smile faltered. "What's so funny?" she snapped, her composure cracking. "You think the destruction of your property is a joke?" I took a step toward her, and for the first time she seemed to register my size, the coiled stillness in my posture. The pink tracksuit suddenly looked a lot less intimidating. "I'm laughing," I said, the humor gone from my voice, replaced by something flat and cold as the lake in winter. "Because you seem to have a fundamental misunderstanding of the situation. You see, the Lakeside Meadows HOA, which you preside over with such diligence, it only covers the 50 residential lots on the west side of the access road." I pointed a thumb over my shoulder toward the sprawling marina, the docks, the boat launch, the commercial building with the ship's store and rental office. "Everything on this side of the road? The marina, the launch, the shoreline, and the 10 acres of woodland this cabin was sitting on? That isn't part of your little kingdom, Karen. It's all private commercial property." Her face went blank, the smugness replaced by a flicker of confusion. "And I know this," I finished, letting the words hang in the air between us, heavy and sharp as an anchor, "because I own it. All of it. You didn't just demolish a cabin, you came onto my land with my permission to use the access road I graciously allow your residents to use, and you destroyed my house. You haven't started a war with a delinquent homeowner, Karen. You've started one with the man who owns the entire damn lake." The shock on her face was a thing of beauty, a perfect tableau of dawning horror. It was the most satisfying thing I had seen in a very long time, but it was just the appetizer. The main course was yet to come. If you've ever had to deal with a power-tripping HOA board or a neighborhood tyrant who thinks they own the world, hit that subscribe button right now. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and share your own HOA nightmare story, because you are not going to want to miss how this ends. Now back to how it all began. 20 years ago, after my second tour, I sank every penny I had into a massive, neglected parcel of land surrounding pristine Lake Cypress. It was anchored by a defunct marina and a lot of overgrown timberland. My father and I, both of us Navy men with a love for building things that last, saw the potential. We spent 5 years clearing land, rebuilding the docks, dredging the launch, and renovating the marina building. We built that little 2-bedroom cabin with our own hands, using timber we milled ourselves from the property. It was more than a house, it was a testament. When my dad passed, it became a sanctuary. Later, to finance a major expansion of the marina's commercial capabilities, I sectioned off a 50-acre parcel on the far side of the property, well away from the lakefront operations. I had it zoned and subdivided into 1-acre residential lots. I sold them off one by one, mostly to families looking for a quiet life by the water. I wrote the initial charter for the Lakeside Meadows HOA myself, establishing it as a separate legal entity to manage the residential area, the roads, the communal septic system, the landscaping of their common areas. I made sure the bylaws were clear. Their jurisdiction ended at the main access road. The marina and all its surrounding acreage were explicitly, legally, and geographically separate. I was the declarant, the initial architect of their community, but I wanted no part in running it. I had a marina to operate and a young family to raise. I handed control over to the first elected board of homeowners, and foolishly, I trusted them. For years it worked. The residents were good people. The boards were reasonable. They paid me a modest annual fee for road maintenance and access, and that was that. Then my wife got sick. The years that followed were a blur of hospitals and treatments, and the marina ran on autopilot thanks to a good manager. After I lost her, the silence of the cabin was too much to bear. When a lucrative long-term security contract came up, 18 months overseas, providing logistical protection for a major engineering firm, I took it. It was a way to keep my skills sharp and my mind occupied. I hired a new marina manager, updated my contact information with everyone I did business with, including my bank, and I thought, the HOA, and I left. I'd received no emails, no certified letters, no calls, just silence. And now, I was back, standing in the ruins of my past, facing down a woman who had mistaken my absence for weakness and my property for her own personal fiefdom. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I wasn't just a landowner. I was a former Navy combat engineer. We build things, and we are experts in how to take them apart. Karen was about to learn that demolition could be a very precise and personal art form. The first 24 hours were a controlled burn of fury. My instinct, honed in places where survival depended on immediate, decisive action, screamed at me to escalate, to call the sheriff, to have her arrested for trespassing and destruction of property right then and there. But the strategic part of my brain, the part that planned complex logistical operations under pressure, took over. A screaming match and a trespassing charge would be messy and unsatisfying. It would make me look unstable. Karen would play the victim, the beleaguered community volunteer just trying to enforce the rules against an aggressive man. Number. This required a different kind of warfare. This was an intelligence-gathering operation. I needed documents, witnesses, and a timeline. I needed to build a case so airtight that by the time I was done, her world would be methodically and completely dismantled, leaving her with nothing but the consequences of her own arrogance. I checked into a small hotel in the nearby town and turned the room into a command center. Laptop open, a fresh legal pad and a pen, and a large coffee. The first call was to my bank. I confirmed my mailing address on file and had them run a transaction history for the last 2 years. As expected, there were no debits from the Lakeside Meadows HOA. There were, however, the automatic annual payments I had set up for the county property taxes on both the commercial marina plot and the separate, undeveloped parcel where my cabin had stood. The taxes were fully paid. Strike one against Karen's narrative. Next, I accessed the county's online property records database. I pulled up the official plat map, the one I had filed myself 20 years ago. There it was in crisp, clear vector lines. Parcel A, Lakeside Marina, 120 acres. Parcel B, Lakeside Meadows Residential, 50 acres. The dividing line was the access road, clear as day. I downloaded and printed 3 copies. I then pulled the deed for my property and the original charter for the HOA. I'd kept digital copies of everything in a secure cloud drive. I spent an hour reading the bylaws I had written all those years ago. The language was ironclad. The HOA's authority was explicitly limited to the residential lots and common areas designated within Parcel B. They had the authority to levy fines, place liens, and even force the sale of a property within their jurisdiction to satisfy unpaid debts. But there was no clause, not a single word, that gave them the right to perform demolition, especially on land they didn't control. They had acted as if they were the county government condemning a property when they were nothing more than a glorified neighborhood club with delusions of grandeur. The weapon she thought she was wielding, the bylaws, was a dud. In fact, it was about to blow up in her face. My next step was recon. I drove back to Lakeside Meadows, parking not near the ruins of my cabin, but on one of the residential streets. The neighborhood was quiet, the lawns manicured to within an inch of their life. Too manicured. I saw a man get out of his car and immediately start pulling a few tiny weeds from a flower bed, casting a nervous glance down the street as he did. The atmosphere was thick with a kind of pristine tension. I spotted an older gentleman watering his roses, his back ramrod straight. He wore a faded navy ball cap. I got out of my truck and walked over, keeping my hands visible and my posture non-threatening. "Afternoon," I said. "Beautiful roses." He turned, and his eyes, a pale, watery blue, widened slightly in recognition. "Jack? Jack Callahan? Son of a gun. I thought that was your truck. It's Arthur Mills. We met a few times years ago when you were first selling these lots." I remembered him, a retired Master Chief. Quiet, solid, no nonsense. We shook hands. His grip was firm. "Good to see you, Arthur. Wish it were under better circumstances." His face clouded over. He glanced around, then lowered his voice. "I heard what happened. About the cabin. It's a damn crime is what it is. We saw the bulldozer come through. Most of us didn't know what was happening until it was too late." "Did the board vote on it?" I asked, keeping my tone even. "Did you see any notice?" Arthur snorted, a bitter little sound. "Notice. That's a good one. Karen holds these emergency board meetings with her 2 cronies, Brenda and Joyce. They pass whatever she wants. They post a notice on the community corkboard for about an hour, then take it down. Fulfills the public notice requirement, she says. Most of us found out about the demolition vote after the fact. She claimed you were 6 months behind on a $200 a month fee and that the cabin was a dilapidated fire hazard. Said she was protecting our property values. $200 a month? For what? My property wasn't even part of the association. It was pure fabrication. What about the other homeowners, Arthur? Are they all okay with this? He shook his head, his lips a thin, grim line. Scared. Last year, the Millers down the street were fined $500 because their kid's tricycle was visible from the road. The Garcias got a lien put on their house for having the wrong shade of white on their trim. She's got people so wound up they're afraid to breathe wrong. Anyone who speaks up at a meeting gets shouted down by her and her little clique. She's a bully, Jack. A real piece of work. She bankrupted the last family that tried to fight her on a fence issue. He pointed with his hose toward a nearby house with a for sale sign in the yard. This was the pattern of abuse I was looking for. This wasn't a one-time overreach. It was a reign of terror in miniature. I looked at Arthur, at the deep lines of frustration etched around his eyes. "She told me she sent me notices," I said. "I never received anything." "She told the board she sent them by certified mail and they came back unclaimed," he said, his eyes narrowing. "She held them up at the meeting, said it was proof you'd abandoned the property." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Fraud. She didn't just twist the rules, she manufactured evidence. She was either incredibly stupid or so drunk on her minor power that she thought she was untouchable. Either way, she had just handed me the shovel to dig her own grave. "Arthur," I said, my voice low and steady, "this is going to stop. I'm going to stop it. But I'll need help. I'll need people who are willing to speak up when the time comes." Arthur looked from me to the wreckage across the road, then back. He straightened his shoulders, the old Master Chief posture returning. "You just tell me what you need, son. You just tell me what you need." My hotel room was no longer just a command center. It had become a war room. The plat maps were taped to the wall, marked up with red Sharpie. Stacks of documents grew on the desk. But my most important asset wasn't paper. It was people. The next morning I called Sarah Jenkins, the lawyer who had handled the legal work for the original land subdivision. Sarah was sharp, a piranha in a pantsuit who lived for complex property law and eviscerating smug opponents in depositions. When I told her the story, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. It wasn't a silence of confusion, but of pure, unadulterated professional glee. "Oh, this is beautiful, Jack," she finally said, her voice practically purring. "This is the kind of spectacular, hubristic overreach lawyers dream about. It's not just a simple tort, it's breach of contract, destruction of private property, fraud, and a flagrant violation of the Davis-Sterling Act, even if she did it outside her jurisdiction. The personal liability here is staggering." "I want to dismantle the whole operation, Sarah," I said, pacing the length of the small room. "I don't just want damages for the cabin. I want Karen removed, I want the board held accountable, and I want protections put in place so this never happens again to anyone in that community." "That's the spirit," she chirped. "First things first. We need to formalize everything you've found. I'll draft an official letter of demand to the HOA and to Karen personally. We'll outline the illegal demolition, cite the specific property laws she's broken, and include a preliminary demand for damages. We'll set the initial figure at $2 million. I stopped pacing. $2 million? The cabin wasn't worth that much? "The cabin itself, no," Sarah corrected. "But we're not just suing for replacement cost. We're suing for the cost of the structure, the value of the heirloom timber used to build it, the emotional distress, punitive damages for the fraudulent and malicious nature of the act, and your legal fees. We start high. It gets their attention and makes it clear we're not negotiating for pocket change. It also puts their insurance carrier on high alert. They will open an investigation and they will not be happy with what they find." I could already picture Karen's face reading that number. The image was deeply satisfying. "What's next?" "While they're panicking over that, you'll be our man on the ground. You said the old Master Chief is on our side. Use him. You need to build a coalition. Karen's power comes from the illusion that she represents the community. We need to shatter that illusion. We need other homeowners to come forward, get written statements, affidavits, anything. We need to document every single instance of her overreach, every ridiculous fine, every threatening letter. We're not just building a case for you, we're building a class action lawsuit in the background." The strategy was brilliant. It wasn't just my fight anymore, it was a liberation movement for the entire neighborhood. That afternoon, Arthur and I met at a coffee shop in town. I laid out the plan, showing him the maps and the copy of the HOA charter. His face grew grimmer with every page. "I knew she was a tyrant," he muttered, shaking his head. "I didn't know she was a common criminal." "She's both," I said, "and we're going to use her criminality to end her tyranny. I need you to talk to people, Arthur. Quietly. Find the ones who've been wronged, the ones who are fed up but too scared to act alone. The Millers with the tricycle, the Garcias with the paint. Let them know they have an ally. Let them know a lawsuit is coming and there's strength in numbers. Arthur nodded, a new determination in his eyes. There's a young couple, the Ortegas. She fined them $1,000 for having a non-compliant basketball hoop. They're good kids, 2 little boys. They took it down, but they had to dip into their savings to pay her. They're angry. Get me their number, I said. My phone buzzed. It was Sarah. Change of plans, she said, her voice tight with excitement. I just got off the phone with a contact at the county clerk's office. I had him pull the file on Lakeside Meadows. Guess what our girl Karen filed 6 months ago? What? A notice of annexation. It's a completely fraudulent document not signed by you as the declarant of the neighboring property, not supported by a vote of the full membership, not legally recorded with a new plat map. It's just a form she filled out herself and had notarized by her friend Brenda, claiming your parcel was being voluntarily absorbed into the HOA. It's the legal basis she used for the demolition. I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was the smoking gun, a forged legal document. She's not just stupid, Jack, Sarah said. She's a felon. Forgery of a public record is a serious crime. We've got her. Oh, we have got her. The pieces were all falling into place. Karen hadn't just bent the rules. She had committed multiple felonies in her desperate quest for control. She had built her entire kingdom on a foundation of lies and forged paper. And I was about to yank the cornerstone out and watch the whole thing come crashing down around her. I spent the next few days meeting with the residents Arthur had identified. I met the Ortegas in their living room, their 2 young sons watching cartoons in the corner. Mr. Ortega, a high school science teacher, showed me the violation notice. It was printed on official-looking HOA letterhead, citing a rule that didn't even exist in the bylaws. We just paid it, Mrs. Ortega said, her voice trembling slightly. We didn't want any more trouble. We heard what happened to the last family who fought her. You won't be fighting her alone this time, I promised. I met with the Garcias, an older couple who had lived there for 10 years. Karen had forced them to repaint their entire house because the shade of white they'd used was, in her opinion, too creamy. The cost was over $5,000. I recorded their story, collected copies of their paperwork. Each story was another brick in the wall of evidence we were building. Each conversation solidified the growing alliance. The fear that had paralyzed the community was slowly being replaced by a shared, simmering anger. They had been isolated, picked off one by one. Now seeing me, a fellow victim but one with a plan and the resources to fight back, gave them hope. They were starting to realize that the monster who had been terrorizing them was just a woman with a clipboard and a misplaced sense of importance, and her reign was about to come to a very abrupt end. The alliance was growing. Within a week, I had sworn affidavits from 7 different families, each detailing a unique story of Karen's extortion and abuse, complete with copies of fraudulent fines, threatening letters, and illegitimate liens. Arthur had become my de facto lieutenant, his quiet dignity and long-standing presence in the community giving him the credibility to rally the fearful. We organized a clandestine meeting in the back room of the town's VFW hall, a place of wood paneling and stale beer that felt appropriately serious for a council of war. The 7 families were there, along with Arthur and myself. The mood was tense, a mix of hope and deep-seated fear. These were ordinary people, teachers, nurses, small business owners, who had been systematically bullied into submission. I know you're all scared, I began, standing before them with my folder of evidence. You're scared of more fines, of liens, of being forced out of your homes. Karen's power has always been based on making you feel alone. Tonight, you are not alone. I laid it all out for them. The fraudulent annexation document, the bylaws that proved she had no authority over my land, the fact that she had likely committed multiple felonies. I explained Sarah's legal strategy, the massive lawsuit against the HOA and Karen personally, which would protect them from further retaliation. For the first time, they saw a clear path to victory. But what about the cost? Mr. Ortega asked, ever the pragmatist. We can't afford a long legal battle. You don't have to, I assured him. I'm funding this. My lawyer is representing all of our interests. All I need from you is your testimony. Your willingness to stand up and tell your story when the time comes. We're going to file a motion for a temporary restraining order against Karen and the board, preventing them from issuing any more fines or taking any action against any of you while the lawsuit is pending. A wave of relief washed over the room. The financial burden, the biggest weapon Karen had, was off the table. Their only cost was courage. One by one, they agreed. The Ortegas, the Garcias, the Millers, all of them. The Lakeside Meadows Homeowners Liberation Front was officially born. The next morning, Sarah filed the lawsuit. The official service of the papers was a moment I wish I could have witnessed firsthand. According to Sarah's process server, a burly ex-cop named Gus, he found Karen holding court by the community pool, lecturing a teenager about the decibel level of his headphones. Gus walked right up to her, said, "Karen Fletcher?" And when she confirmed, he handed her the thick stack of legal documents. "You've been served," he announced, his voice booming across the water. He then served her two cronies, Brenda and Joyce, who were flanking her in matching lounge chairs. The complaint named the Lakeside Meadows HOA as a defendant, but it also named Karen Fletcher, Brenda Peterson, and Joyce Miller as individual defendants, piercing the corporate veil of the HOA due to their willful and malicious actions outside the scope of their authority. The $2 million demand was on the first page. Gus reported that Karen's face went from pink to a blotchy, furious red. She started sputtering about harassment and frivolous lawsuits, but Gus just tipped his hat and walked away, leaving her standing there with the legal grenade in her hands. The lawsuit was the opening salvo. Now came the siege. Sarah immediately filed a barrage of discovery requests. We demanded every piece of paper the HOA had generated for the past 2 years. All financial statements, bank records, checks, meeting minutes, emails between board members, and every single piece of correspondence related to me and my property. This is a standard legal tactic, but in this case, it was also a trap. We knew their records would either be a complete mess or, even better, they would be doctored. Over the next few weeks, the community held its breath. The temporary restraining order was granted, freezing Karen's ability to levy any new punishments. It was like a great weight had been lifted. Kids were playing in their yards again. Mr. Garcia defiantly put a flamingo on his lawn, a small act of rebellion that brought a smile to my face. Karen and her cronies were uncharacteristically quiet, no doubt scrambling to respond to our legal onslaught. As expected, the documents they finally produced were a joke. The meeting minutes were clearly sanitized, reduced to a few vague sentences. The financial records were incomplete, with large unexplained expenditures simply labeled community maintenance. And the certified mail receipts for the notices she supposedly sent me? They were conspicuously absent. "They're hiding something," Sarah said over the phone. "They think they can stonewall us. Now we file a motion to compel, and we ask the judge to sanction them for failing to comply with discovery. This is where we start turning the screws." While Sarah was fighting the paper war, I was building my own arsenal. I hired a professional land surveyor. For 2 days, a team in bright orange vests hammered stakes and used sophisticated GPS equipment to remark the exact legally defined boundary between my Marina property and the HOA's residential zone. The result was a brand new certified survey map that showed my demolished cabin was located a full 75 feet inside my property line. It was indisputable proof. Then I hired a specialty appraiser, a man who dealt in unique and historic structures. He spent a day at the site sifting through the wreckage. I gave him the photos of the cabin, the blueprints my dad and I had drawn on old drafting paper, and even a sample of the wood from a remaining floor joist. His final report was a work of art. It valued the replacement cost not just on square footage, but on the specific quality of the old-growth timber we had used, the custom stonework of the fireplace I had built myself, and a significant multiplier for the loss of a structure with unique historical and sentimental value. The final appraisal came in at $1,850,000, a number that was both staggering and legally defensible. Our initial demand of $2 million was no longer a negotiating tactic. It was a documented reality. The trap was now fully set. We had the law on our side, we had a coalition of witnesses, and we had irrefutable physical and financial evidence. Karen thought she was playing checkers, moving her little pieces around her tiny board. She had no idea she was in a chess match against a grandmaster, and she was already in checkmate. She just hadn't realized it yet. The next move was to make it public. The regular monthly HOA meeting was scheduled for the first Tuesday of the month, held in the small, stuffy community clubhouse. In the past, these were poorly attended affairs dominated by Karen and her followers. Tonight was different. Arthur had spread the word. Be there. When I walked in, the room was packed. Every seat was taken and people were standing along the walls. My allies were all there, scattered throughout the crowd, their faces a mixture of anxiety and resolve. I took a seat in the back, my thick binder of evidence resting on my lap. Karen, Brenda, and Joyce were seated at a folding table at the front, looking flustered by the unexpected crowd. Karen banged a small gavel on the table, the sound barely audible over the murmuring. "Welcome to the monthly meeting," she began, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We have a few items of old business to discuss." "I'd like to add a new item of business to the agenda," I said, my voice cutting through the room. I didn't stand, didn't shout. I just spoke, and the room fell silent. Every head turned toward me. Karen's eyes narrowed into slits. "You are not recognized, Mr. Callahan. You are not a member in good standing." "According to this," I said, holding up the certified survey map, "I'm not a member at all. My property is not, nor has it ever been, part of your association, which brings me to my point of order, the illegal demolition of my home on my private property, orchestrated by you using HOA funds." A gasp went through the crowd. Karen's face turned a familiar shade of blotchy red. "That is a private legal matter and will not be discussed here. This is a meeting for community business." "This is community business, Mr. Sim." "Mr." Ortega called out from the side of the room. "When you use our dues to hire a demolition crew to illegally destroy a man's house, it becomes our business." "She used our money for that?" someone in the front row asked, her voice laced with shock. "How much did it cost?" The questions started coming like a volley of arrows. "Did the board vote on this? Was there a public notice?" Karen banged her gavel furiously. "Order, order! These are baseless accusations. The board acted in accordance with the bylaws to remove a dilapidated, abandoned structure that was a blight on our community." "A blight?" I asked, standing up now. I walked slowly to the front of the room, opening my binder on an empty corner of the table. I turned the appraisal report around for everyone to see, the nearly $2 million figure at the bottom in bold print. "This is the official appraisal of the blight you destroyed, Karen. A structure valued at almost $2 million for its unique construction and materials." The crowd murmured, the sound growing louder. Brenda and Joyce were starting to look pale, shrinking in their seats. "And as for being abandoned," I continued, my voice cold and clear, "I was working overseas. A fact that wouldn't have been hard to ascertain, but you weren't interested in the truth. You were interested in a land grab." I then unrolled the survey map on the table, its crisp lines a stark contrast to Karen's frantic energy. "This is the certified survey completed last week. It shows the property line right here along the access road. My cabin was 75 feet on my side of that line. You were trespassing." "That's not true," Karen shrieked, her voice cracking. "We annexed that property. It's part of the HOA." "You mean this?" I said, pulling out a copy of the fraudulent notice of annexation Sarah had uncovered. "This document? The one you filed with the county without my signature? The one you had your friend Brenda here notarize in direct violation of notary law since she is a party to the document? The one that constitutes felony forgery of a public record?" The room went dead silent. Brenda let out a small, strangled gasp. Everyone was staring at her, then back at Karen. The word felony hung in the air like poison gas. "This is harassment." Karen finally managed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You are intimidating the board." "I'm presenting fact, I countered calmly. "And now the rest of the community is going to present their facts." On cue, Arthur stood up. "My name is Arthur Mills. I've lived here 15 years. I'd like to know why the board felt it was necessary to place a lien on the Garcias' home for the color of their paint, a rule that doesn't exist in the bylaws." Mrs. Garcia, emboldened, stood up. "We had to spend our savings to repaint our house. We were scared." Then Mr. Ortega stood. "And I'd like to know why I was fined $1,000 for a basketball hoop, money my family couldn't afford to lose." One by one, my allies stood up. The Millers, the Johnsons, the Patels. They told their stories of petty fines, of threats, of financial hardship, all at the hands of the woman sitting at the front of the room. With each story, Karen's face grew harder, her denial more shrill. But the tide had turned. The rest of the community was looking at her not as a leader, but as a predator. They saw the pattern. They saw the abuse. The illusion of her authority was shattered, replaced by the ugly reality of her greed. The meeting descended into chaos. People were shouting questions, demanding answers, demanding that Karen and the board resign. Karen, completely losing control, screamed for everyone to be quiet, that the meeting was adjourned. She grabbed her gavel and a few loose papers and practically fled the room, with Brenda and Joyce scurrying after her like frightened rats. The community was left there, buzzing with anger and a newfound sense of empowerment. They surrounded me, not with accusations, but with questions, with words of support, with their own stories of minor injustices they had been too afraid to mention. We had done it. We had taken the fight public. We had exposed her lies in front of the very people she claimed to represent. This wasn't the end, but it was the beginning of her end. She had been publicly humiliated, her authority torched, her crimes laid bare. A cornered animal is a dangerous one, and I knew she would do something desperate. I was counting on it. Karen's reaction was exactly as predictable and self-destructive as I had hoped. Instead of retreating, she doubled down. The day after the disastrous meeting, my allies started receiving new letters. Not fines. The restraining order prevented that, but notices of investigation. They were terrifying-looking documents filled with legalese she had likely copied from the internet, accusing them of conspiring to undermine the authority of the board and slandering the president. It was a pathetic attempt to intimidate them back into silence, but it had the opposite effect. It solidified their resolve and gave Sarah more ammunition for our lawsuit, proving a pattern of retaliation. Then came the move that sealed her fate. Panicked and paranoid, Karen made a withdrawal from the HOA's reserve fund, a whopping $25,000. She used it to hire a private investigator, a seedy character who operated out of a strip mall, to dig up dirt on me. She was looking for anything she could use to discredit me, a past legal issue, a disgruntled former employee, a hint of scandal. The PI was clumsy. He started by calling my former Navy colleagues, asking leading questions about my service record. It was a monumental mistake. The first person he called was a retired admiral I'd served under, a man who considered me a surrogate son. The admiral immediately called me, his voice like thunder. "Jack, what in God's name is going on? Some two-bit gumshoe is calling around asking if you were ever disciplined for instability on deployment. I told him if he ever called this number again, I'd have him investigated for impersonating a federal agent." That was it. That was the kill shot we were waiting for. Using community funds for a personal vendetta against a litigant in a lawsuit is a catastrophic breach of fiduciary duty. It's embezzlement, plain and simple. Sarah was ecstatic. "She's a gift that keeps on giving," she said. "We're filing an emergency motion with the judge right now. We're asking for an immediate freeze of all HOA assets and the appointment of a third-party receiver to manage their finances, based on this blatant misuse of funds." The motion was filed the next morning. We included a sworn affidavit from the admiral, a man whose credibility was beyond reproach. The judge, who was already losing patience with the HOA's failure to comply with discovery, granted the motion almost immediately. An accounting firm was appointed as the receiver, and the HOA's bank accounts were frozen solid. Karen could no longer spend a single dime of the community's money. The news spread through Lakeside Meadows like wildfire. The HOA was broke, its assets frozen by a judge because the president had used their money to hire a private detective. The anger that had been simmering since the public meeting now boiled over. The other two board members who weren't part of Karen's inner circle, a quiet accountant named David and a retired school teacher named Mary, finally realized the extent of their own personal liability. They had been passive, allowing Karen to run the show, but now they saw that her actions could bankrupt them all personally. They called me directly, their voices shaking with panic. "We didn't know, Jack," David pleaded. "We had no idea she was doing this. The demolition vote, she told us it was just a formality, that the property had been legally condemned. The private investigator, This is the first we're hearing of it." "Ignorance isn't a defense when you're on a board of directors," I told them, my voice firm but not unkind. "You had a duty to ask questions to see the documents for yourselves, but you can still do the right thing." "What do we do?" Mary asked. "You have the power to call an emergency meeting of the board to vote on the removal of the president for cause," I explained. "You and David make a majority on the 5-person board if you vote together. You can remove her, Brenda, and Joyce immediately. Then you can officially cooperate with our lawsuit, which will significantly mitigate your personal liability." The choice was simple. Go down with Karen's ship or grab the lifeboat I was offering them. They didn't hesitate. They drafted the notice for an emergency board meeting to be held in 2 days, citing gross financial misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty as the reason. They posted it on the community corkboard not for an hour but for 48 hours with a copy emailed to every single homeowner. The final confrontation was set. Karen's financial power was gone. Her base of support had evaporated. Her legal position was indefensible. All she had left was her title, and we were about to take that away from her too. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. This was the methodical demolition I had envisioned. We hadn't just attacked the fortress. We had cut off its supply lines, turned its own soldiers against it, and were about to watch its commander be deposed by her own people. The night before the meeting, I drove out to the lake. I walked to the edge of the water, near the ruined foundation of my cabin. The moon was bright, casting a silver path across the dark, still water. The air was clean and cold. For the first time since I'd been back, I felt a sense of peace settling over me. The anger was still there, a cold, hard knot in my chest. But it was no longer a raging fire. It was fuel. It had driven me this far, and it would see me through to the end. Karen had tried to erase my history, to wipe away a part of my life that was sacred. But she had failed. All she had done was awaken a part of me that had been dormant for too long, the part that knew how to fight, how to plan, and how to win. And tomorrow, I would win. The emergency board meeting was less of a meeting and more of a public trial. It was held on the community lawn by the clubhouse, as the building was too small to accommodate the entire neighborhood, every single member of which seemed to be present. The atmosphere was electric. David Chen, the accountant, and Mary Weatherby, the retired teacher, sat at the folding table, their faces grim and determined. Karen, Brenda, and Joyce sat at the other end, isolated and surrounded by a sea of hostile faces. Karen attempted to seize control from the outset, banging a gavel she had brought from home. "This meeting is illegitimate," she declared, her voice high and strained. "It was not called by the president." "According to bylaw 7.4, an emergency meeting can be called by any 2 board members," David stated calmly, his voice amplified by a small portable speaker they had brought. "We have a quorum. The first and only item on the agenda is a vote of no confidence and a motion for the immediate removal of President Karen Fletcher, Treasurer Brenda Peterson, and Secretary Joyce Miller for gross misconduct." The crowd erupted in applause. Karen's face contorted with rage. "You have no right! I was elected by this community, and we are unelecting you," a voice shouted from the crowd. David ignored her and proceeded with the motion. The grounds for removal are as follows. The authorization of a demolition on private property outside of HOA jurisdiction, constituting destruction of property and trespass. The filing of a fraudulent document with the county clerk, constituting felony forgery. The gross misuse of $25,000 from the reserve fund for personal use, namely the hiring of a private investigator to harass a litigant, constituting embezzlement, and a pattern of retaliatory harassment against members of the community. Each charge landed like a physical blow. Brenda was openly weeping now, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Joyce was staring at her hands, refusing to look at anyone. Only Karen remained defiant, her jaw set, her eyes burning with a hateful fire. "This is a conspiracy," she spat, "led by him." She pointed at me where I stood at the edge of the crowd. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. David looked out at the assembled homeowners. The evidence for these charges is substantial and has been reviewed by the board's legal counsel, who has advised us that continuing to support the current leadership will result in the bankruptcy of the association and significant personal liability for all members. It is time for a vote. All in favor of the motion to remove Karen Fletcher, Brenda Peterson, and Joyce Miller from the board of directors say aye. A deafening roar of "Aye" went up from the crowd. It was a single unified voice of a community reclaiming its power. All opposed? David asked. Silence. Even Karen, in a rare moment of recognizing total defeat, said nothing. "The motion carries," David announced. "Karen, Brenda, Joyce, you are hereby removed from the board, effective immediately. Please turn over all HOA property, including keys, records, and financials, by the end of the day." It was over. The tyrant had been deposed, but I wasn't finished. Later that afternoon, as Karen was sullenly packing a cardboard box with her personal effects from the small HOA office, I walked in. Brenda and Joyce had already fled. It was just the two of us. She looked up, her face puffy and stained with tears of rage. "Come to gloat?" she sneered. "No," I said, my voice quiet. "I've come to give you a final accounting." I stood in the doorway blocking her exit. "My lawyer, Sarah Jenkins, got off the phone with the HOA's insurance carrier an hour ago. They have officially denied the claim for the demolition of my cabin. Their investigation concluded that the act was willful, malicious, and criminal, and therefore not covered under their policy for errors and omissions." The color drained from her face. "What does that mean?" she whispered. "It means the HOA is on the hook for the full $2 million judgment we are about to win," I explained slowly, letting each word sink in. "But since the HOA's assets are frozen and they have no money, my lawyer will be going after the personal assets of those responsible, the board members who voted for the demolition. That's you, Brenda and Joyce. You are now personally, jointly, and severally liable for $2 million. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. That will ruin me," she stammered. "I'll lose my house." "That is the consequence of your actions," I said, my voice devoid of sympathy. "But wait, there's more." I took a step into the room. "You see this marina?" I gestured out the window toward the docks and the lake. "The main selling point of this entire community, the access to the boat launch, the docks, the lakefront, it's all on my property. For 20 years, I have granted the residents of Lakeside Meadows access via a simple easement agreement. As of this morning, I have instructed my lawyer to file a notice of termination for that easement, citing the HOA's breach of good faith and hostile actions. Effective in 30 days, the gate at the access road will be locked. No residents of Lakeside Meadows will be permitted to access the marina or the lake until the $2 million judgment is paid in full." Her eyes went wide with genuine terror. I had not only bankrupted her, I had just single-handedly obliterated the property value of every home in the neighborhood she claimed to be protecting. "You can't do that," she cried. "People will be ruined. The property values will plummet." "You should have thought of that," I said, my voice as cold as the bottom of the lake. "Before you decided to demolish my house, you wanted to be a queen, Karen. Well, now you get to be the queen of a kingdom with no castle, no treasury, and no access to the water. You built this. Enjoy it." I turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the middle of the room, surrounded by the ruins of her petty empire. There was no shouting, no final struggle, just the quiet, devastating finality of a perfectly executed demolition. Her demolition. The aftermath was a study in contrasts. For Karen, it was a swift and brutal decline. Faced with a $2 million personal judgment and ostracized by the community she once terrorized, her life unraveled. The lawsuit proceeded to a summary judgment, which the judge granted in our favor without hesitation. Citing the mountain of evidence, the court affirmed the damages at just over $1.9 million. Brenda and Joyce, through their lawyers, immediately declared bankruptcy. Karen tried to fight it. She sold her house to pay her legal bills, but it wasn't nearly enough. The last I heard, she was living in a small apartment across town working a retail job, her wages being garnished to pay a tiny fraction of the debt she would carry for the rest of her life. She was a ghost in her own story, a cautionary tale whispered among the residents of Lakeside Meadows. For the community, however, it was a rebirth. The new board, led by Arthur Mills as president and David Chen as treasurer, was a model of transparency and service. Their first official act was to formally apologize to me and to all the families who had been wronged by Karen. Their second act was to face the crisis I had created by revoking Marina access. Arthur and David came to see me, hats in hand, a week after the judgment. We met at the Marina on the patio of the ship's store. "Jack," Arthur began, his voice heavy, "we understand why you did it. And we don't blame you. But locking the gate, it's going to hurt a lot of good people who stood with you. It'll destroy the value of their homes." "I know," I said, "and I have no intention of punishing the entire community for the sins of 3 people. But the judgment stands. A debt is owed." I had discussed this with Sarah at length. My goal was never to bankrupt my neighbors. My goal was justice and restoration. "Here's my proposal," I told them. "I will not enforce the personal judgments against the individual homeowners of Lakeside Meadows. I will, however, place a lien against the HOA itself for the full amount. The HOA will make a structured payment to me with a reasonable interest rate over a period of 15 years. This will require a special assessment on all homeowners, but spread across 50 homes over 15 years, it will be manageable. It will be a constant, tangible reminder of the cost of unchecked power." David did a quick calculation on his phone. "It's doable," he said, a look of immense relief on his face. "It's about an extra $80 a month per household. It's a bitter pill, but it's not poison. In exchange," I continued, "I will immediately reinstate the Marina access easement. Furthermore, I will personally fund the legal costs for the new board to completely rewrite the HOA bylaws. We will put in term limits for board members, strict controls on spending, and a clear, simple process for members to recall the board. We will make this community bulletproof against another Karen." Arthur looked at me, his eyes shining with gratitude. "You'd do that? After everything?" "This community is part of my legacy too, Arthur," I said. "I let it fall into darkness by not paying attention. Now I'm helping to turn the lights back on." The agreement was drawn up and signed. The gate remained open. The new bylaws were drafted with Sarah's help and ratified by a unanimous vote of the homeowners. A sense of shared purpose and relief settled over Lakeside Meadows. The oppressive tension was gone, replaced by a quiet neighborliness. The flamingo on Mr. Garcia's lawn was joined by a few others. The Ortega's basketball hoop went back up. The community began to heal. As for me, I started to rebuild. I hired a local architect and a team of skilled craftsmen. We didn't just rebuild the old cabin, we improved upon it. We used the original footprint but expanded the deck, added larger windows overlooking the lake, and used modern, sustainable materials alongside reclaimed timber from the property. The new fireplace was built with stones pulled from the lake itself. Throughout the construction, members of the community would stop by, not to be nosy, but to offer a helping hand, a cold drink, or just to say thank you. Mr. Ortega helped me wire the new sound system. Arthur spent a weekend helping me varnish the new deck. It wasn't just my cabin anymore, it felt like a community project. 6 months later, I stood on the finished deck of my new home, a cup of coffee in my hand, watching the sunrise paint the sky over the calm water. The scent of fresh-cut wood and pine filled the air. My daughter, now in college, was coming to visit for the weekend. The house was no longer a silent sanctuary of the past. It was a living, breathing space, ready for new memories. I looked across the water at my marina, bustling with the morning activity of fishermen and boaters. I looked toward the quiet homes of lakeside meadows where lights were beginning to turn on. I had lost a house, but in the process, a community had found its voice, and I had found a renewed sense of my own place in the world. Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about rebuilding something stronger and better from the ashes of what was destroyed. Karen had tried to take my home, but in the end, she had only shown me how to truly build one. And this one I knew was built to last.